So, as we come back into Joshua, there's we sort of build a jaded thinking after a while when you go to these narratives in the Old Testament, like what is there really redeeming in the Old Testament narratives? It seems to be you do a lot of reading, a lot about people, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, what's really the value of it? And you do have to have some patience, because as you work your way through these large, it's fat amount of text. And every now and then as you're reading through it, this thing just jumps off the page and knocks you sideways. And there's one of those in here today. And in fact, it's the line that jumps off the page in this very large section we're going to read today is so stunning that it actually ends up being the theme of the next book of the Bible in Judges. Yes. So that's the trivia challenge for the morning. I'll point it out when we get there. But it's really there. And as we look at these narratives, they're not so much for us to be educated about the history of Israel, although that's interesting. What it's there for is to teach us about the character of God in his relationship with Israel. And we, in the same kind of way, have this relationship with God. So it gives us, in the real life circumstances of real gritty life, who is God like, and how does he walk along with us in life, and how do we walk with him? That's really what we're looking for. So if you read any of these narratives, and you go back and read them yourself, don't just go through them and say, well, I got through them. Ask yourself all the way through this, what is this telling me about the character of God? Because God never changes. Okay, so that's why we're here. And there's a very harsh edge to these particular sections, because we see a lot of killing. And so I'll just kind of get you up on that. But as I was thinking about it, there is a sense in which, and I'll let you hear this so you can filter it as we go along. There's a sense in which that this is a lot like when we used to go camping as a family with small children. What? Yeah. So when we would go camping when we had small children, we went camping using tents. That's a challenge right there. I remember kids sitting in wash tubs on top of picnic tables trying to stay clean, which is an impossible task. But when we would go to a campsite, when you're sleeping in a tent that's open to the outside, to nature and stuff like that, I would walk the entire campsite before we got there. I walked to the center of the campsite looking for hazards. I'd walk along the edges, and I'm looking for things like rattlesnakes or signs of animals or poison oak or something like that. I would walk the entire campsite knowing that in just a few minutes we're going to unleash the children, and they're going to run and they're going to find everything in the campsite. So I would, as a good father, make sure there were no hazards in the campsite. But how crazy would it be if I did that walkthrough, I came back to Dorothy, and she says, how's it look? Well, pretty good, except there was a family of rattlesnakes in the corner over there. Did you take care of them? Well, no, I'm an animal lover. And so I thought, we'll be okay if we just leave them there. Well, what are you talking about? Because they're actually a clear and present danger to the health of our children. This is the book of Joshua. God is going through as a good father, and he's clearing out the clear and present dangers to the livelihoods of the Israelites. That's what he's doing. But it's harsh sometimes. I've killed rattlesnakes, and it's harsh when you do that. But this is what God is doing, because these are toxic dangers to the people that he loves. So what we're looking at is a balance of a God who we know is loving, but a God who's also very just. And justice is all about dealing with the bad things that happen to the ones you love. So unless there's justice, there is no love. Love is intentionally choosing the best for somebody, which also implies deliberately non-choosing the bad for that person. So justice is the determining factor between what is beneficial and what's not. So you have to have love and justice, and today we'll see both those. Okay, well let's get in. That was just like the huge overview. Let's get away from that Google Earth thing. So now we're going to southern Canaan. I don't know why, but it made me think of Sweet Home Alabama. I don't know why it made me think of that. Sweet Home Southern Canaan. I don't know what it is. But we're going to go down in southern Canaan, which actually it's very much the heart of what is present-day Israel. It includes Jerusalem and to the south of there. So it's a major part. North of this area we'll go to next week is pretty much considered Samaria and Galilee. So we'll go there next week. But this is the heartblood. So we're going into this area, and we're going there to be courageous, and over here to adhere to what's important, and also to apply it, So Kozak and mates that we talked about, courageous, strong and courageous. So we're going to southern Canaan. By the way, do you know where Canaan comes from? Maybe we've never touched on this before. Canaan was the name of one of the grandsons of Noah through his son Ham. And the people who came from Canaan, actually that's not, it looks like Canaan. You know why there's two A's in Canaan? Because there's a diphthong right there. It's actually Kana'ani. Kana'ani. That's you don't care about that. Anyway, so Canaan is a grandson of Noah, and Canaan's offspring are the ones who are named after these people that we're going to talk about right now. If you think I'm lying, go to, I think it's the very opening chapter of 1 Chronicles, and it'll actually show you this stuff. So Canaan is the name of a grandson of Noah, and they're not supposed to be living here, and these are all of his descendants that are living here. So that's what's happening. This is through Ham. So that's Canaan. That's Ka'ani. Okay, so here's where we've come to, just to get you kind of situated. Last week we were in 7 and 8, and we were into the north, and today we're going into chapters 9 and 10, and we're going to aim to the south. And instead of being up there, they're going to be going all over this western side of the Dead Sea. So that's where we're going to be today. So, buckle your seats. We're going places today. And we're going to start, wait, go back. One more time, go back. It's double clicking on me. There we go. Okay. So we're going to identify a new place. Gilgal is actually the center of operations, and then we're going to be going to Gibeon, which is in the top left. That'll be the center of stuff. So there's the Jericho, Shechem trail. We're going to be looking at Gibeon, which is going to start us out. And Gibeon is interesting in terms of these, what I call squatters in the area, because they were squatting on what is a really neat kind of, Nabi Hill is what it is. That's in the northern part of this southern Canaan. And this Nabi Hill, whenever you look at geography in Israel, and in fact, anytime during that time, these kinds of Nabi Hills were easily defensible. So people chose them to live on top of them, because when bad guys would come around the edges of it, they would have to attack going uphill. So they were very naturally defensive. Jericho had the advantage of not only being an old knobby hill, but also had double walls. This is a knobby hill, but it's still just very defensible. In fact, the choice of Jerusalem as a place for the center of Israel was because of this same geography. Instead of being a perfect knob, it was on three sides a knob, and on the northern side, it kind of slopes uphill. So it turns out in the history of Israel, Jerusalem was successfully invaded always from the north, because there's no knobbiness to the north. It's a flat ground. But on the east, south, and west sides, it is just like this. It's a knob. So here we have these people that are squatting in Gibeon, and it's going to be the center of the action today. So let me just show you. This is a little bit of the outline. We're going to look at chapters 9 and 10, and I'm going to drop into the beginning of chapter 10 for a second, because chapter 10 is going to be about 5 kings of the south. They're going to be dispatched with great ease, it turns out. But in the middle of one of the verses in chapter 10, look at this. This is bizarre. Joshua 10 verse 6, the men of Gibeon, we just saw, that's that knobby place. The men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, that's their headquarters down near Jericho, saying, "Don't relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly. Save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us." Which makes you think when you read that, well, wait a second. Why is Joshua protecting Gibeon? Isn't he supposed to destroy them? And yet when you drop in the beginning of chapter 10, here are these people on this knobby hill who are supposed to be devoted to destruction for the Lord. They're sending messages down to Gilgal, where Israel is camped, and they're saying, "You come right now," snapping their fingers, "you come right now and protect us." What? Well, it sounds strange because we didn't read chapter 9. So we're going to read chapter 9, and in chapter 9, it'll give us an understanding about why it is that the people who live in Gibeon, who are not friends of Israel, they are devoted to destruction as well, why they can snap their fingers, and Joshua has to come up and defend them against the 5 kings of the south. What? Yes. So let's just read it and find out. The clever Gibeonites. "So as soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country, in the lowland, all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Termites, and the Jebusites." Oh, there's no termites. "And the Jebusites, when they heard this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning, and went and made ready provisions, and they took worn-out sacks for their donkeys, and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out patched sandals on their feet, and worn-out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, 'Oh, we've come from a distant country, So now make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, by the way, the people who live in Gibeon, Hivites. You know how I remember that? Gibeon looks like a beehive. Hivites. Never mind, you don't care. Okay, so the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us. Then how can we make a covenant with you? And they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you? And where did you come from? They said to him, well, from a very distant country your servants have come because of the name of the Lord your God, for we have heard a report of him and all that he did in Egypt and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who are beyond the Jordan, to Sihon the king of Heshbon and to Og the king of Bashan who lived in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, take provisions in your hand for the journey. Go to meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. Look, here's our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day that we set out to come to you. But behold, it's dry, crumbly. These wineskins were new when we filled them. And behold, they have burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey. So the men took some of their provisions. But they did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. But at the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with him, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. And the people of Israel set out and reached their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Chephirah, Beeroth, Kiriath Jearim. But the people of Israel did not attack them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. And then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, we've sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. So this we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because the oath that we swore to them. And the leaders said to them, let them live. So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said to them. And Joshua summoned them, and he said to them, why did you deceive us, saying, we're from very, very far from you, when you dwell among us? Now therefore you are cursed. And some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood, drawers of water for the house of my God. And they answered Joshua, well, because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you, and we did this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good to you, whatever seems right in your sight to do to us, do it. So he did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day in that place that he should choose. So they cut a pretty slick deal, and they fooled them into thinking that they didn't live within the confines of the area that God said they are devoted to destruction. And because they faked their clothing, they faked their sandals, they faked their wineskins and their food, they faked everything, they got Joshua and all the elders of Israel to believe that they were not targeted and devoted to destruction. And so Joshua made a deal with them. We'll come back to that. So let's get to the 5 kings, the in and out of the 5 kings. And again, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of geography. So there's Gilgal, there's the center of operations, there's Gibeon, the little knobby hill. And we're going to be going here in the south part to the 5 kings. The 5 kings live in Jarmuth, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Jerusalem. Those are the 5 kings that are now going to come up against Joshua, and they're going to try and attack. They're going to attack Joshua and try and fend off this invasion that looks like it's coming from the Israelites, and see what they can do about that. Okay, so here's a bigger picture right here. And let me just start reading into chapter 10, because this will give you a better idea. But those 5 guys in the south are the ones who want to get rid of Joshua. And they're going to do it by attacking Gibeon, because Gibeon looks like now it's a ally of the Israelites. So, as soon as Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had captured Ai and had devoted it to destruction, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, he feared greatly. Because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were warriors. So Adoni-Zedek, the king of Jerusalem, he sent to Hoham, king of Hebron. By the way, I'd change my name if I was king. It wouldn't be Hoham. Hoham. No. So Hoham, if I was writing the Bible, I wouldn't choose it. That's just stupid. Anyway, Hoham, the king of Hebron, to Piram, the king of Jarmuth, to Japhia, the king of Lachish, and to Debir, the king of Eglon, and saying this, come up to me and help me, and let us strike Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the people of Israel. So then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, they gathered their forces. And it probably looks sort of like this. Eglon and Hebron are together, Lachish and Jarmuth, and they headed up north toward Gibeon, and they probably met in Jerusalem, because that's the guy who's calling for the action. So four armies come up from the south, and they join the 5th army in Jerusalem, and then they go and they attack Gibeon. They gathered their forces, went up with all their armies, and encamped against Gibeon, and they made war against it. So the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, don't relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly. Save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us. So Joshua went up from Gilgal. Is he going up? Yeah, there he's going up from Gilgal. And he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them. I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. By the way, it's almost a 4,000-foot rise from where they lived in Gilgal up to the top of the hill where they're going to. 4,000 feet, about 3,800. Don't fear them. Joshua came up upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal, and the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon and chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon. By the way, that little yellow line, that's called the ascent of Beth Horon. You come down 2,400 feet down to sea level, down that. That's a major valley right there. So he chased them down that valley, the ascent of Beth Horon, struck them as far as Azekah, and also to Makkedah, those 2 places. So he really chased them a long way. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon over here, as they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them. Well, we'll come back to that. What? Yeah. So this is the whole thing. So you have clever Gibeon making a contract. The 5 kings come up and they attack Gibeon, hoping to take out Joshua's best allies at the time. And then of course, God wins. And so at the end of the story, we'll jump to the end of the story. So Joshua struck the whole land and the hill country and the Negev and the lowland and the slopes. You skip the cool stuff. Okay, I skipped the cool stuff. Let's take a look at the cool stuff. By the way, the layout of chapter 10 is unconventional for us. It's not just chronological. They finish the battle and they go back and look at parts of the battle. This is what he does when he goes over here. There's actually 3 sections of really interesting stuff included in the middle of it that should have been included up to verse 10, but that's just the way to do it. So it's the cool stuff. So the cool stuff, well, yeah, the cool stuff I started for you in verse 11. There were miracles in part of this. This wasn't just Joshua going up and attacking them and chasing them all the way down to Azekah and down to Makkedah. By the way, do you know what's famous about Azekah? If you ever go to Israel and you want to go and see where David slew Goliath in the valley of Elah, at the western end of the valley of Elah is a knobby hill called Azekah. Anyway, let's look at some miracles. Okay, so they fled before Israel, and while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah. Remember how far away that is? As far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones. Oh, it's hailstones. Okay. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. Wow. That's astonishing. That's a miracle. That's absolutely a miracle. No, hailstones are not a miracle. We know what happens to them when you get these big thunderhead clouds and the thermals, things go up and down and water coats on, then they come down. Hailstones are not a miracle. Well, they are if they actually are against your enemies at the right time of day at the right place. And for as far as the ascent of Beth Horon all the way down to Azekah, and it kills more people than you've killed with a sword. I'd call that a miracle. We had some tremendous hailstones here about, 3 years ago? Golf ball size. Got almost everyone's house re-roofed in Brigham City. But they were gigantically damaging. There's more miracles. At that time also, same time, during the hailstones and the fighting, all that stuff, at that time Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel. And he said, in the sight of all Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ailon. And the sun stood still, the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Isn't this written in the book of Jashar? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven and didn't hurry to set for about a whole day. And there has been no day like it before or since when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. I've had discussions with people about this before, skeptics about the Bible. They said, that's impossible. Do you know what would happen if you stopped the sun in the sky? I mean, do you know? Yeah, I do. Well, that's impossible. I know. That's why it's called a miracle. But there's a lot of people who are skeptics of the Bible who want to take what we assert to be miracles and say, well, I can find a natural occurrence of something that will explain that got blown into a miracle, but it actually isn't a miracle. It's just it's a natural part of nature until you get to something like this. And I've read a lot of naturalistic explanations of this. They're all extraordinarily weak, scientifically speaking. So all you can do is come back to saying, well, it's a miracle. As much a miracle as someone coming back from the dead after rotting for 3 days. It's a miracle, which is why we call it a miracle. Okay, so those are the miracles on the entire fighting ground. So Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. Okay, well, there's more here. So what happened to the 5 kings? Well, you see, the story ended before they told us. So this is another, what they call an inclusio. It's an inclusion of what happened to the 5 kings. And that's what verse 16 is all about, is what happens to the 5 kings. Even though they've returned to the camp of Gilgal, we're going to rewind the tape and go back and find out what happened to the 5 kings. Well, these 5 kings, they fled and hid themselves in a cave at Makkedah. Down there. So they got chased down there and they found a cave, and the 5 kings together said, let's go hide in the cave. So they went to a cave, and it was told to Joshua, the 5 kings have been found. They're hidden in the cave at Makkedah. And Joshua said, well, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard it. But do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies. Attack the rear guard. Don't let them enter their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. And when Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out, and when the remnant that remained of them had entered into the fortified cities, then all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. Not a man moved his tongue against any of the people of Israel. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave. Bring out the 5 kings, bring them to me from the cave. And they did so, and they brought those 5 kings out to him from the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought those kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings. I'll just pause. By the way, that's a sign of triumph over your enemies. When the guy in charge of the other side is down, prostrate in front of you, and you put your foot on his neck, that's a sign of triumph over your enemies. By the way, that's part of the imagery of the Lord sitting on the throne and makes his enemies footstools for his feet.
So
That's what that's all about. Okay, back to the story. Then they came near, put their feet on their necks, and Joshua said to them, don't be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous. Hazak and Amates, be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. And afterward Joshua struck them, put them to death, and he hanged them on 5 trees, and they hung in the trees until evening. But at the time of the going down of the sun, Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. And they set large stones against the mouth of the cave, which remain to this very day. Wow. There must have been more battles. Well, there are. And we're going to read them. So you're going to have to watch. Going to have to watch up here. Don't watch me. Watch up here. There were, and these are chronicled in verses 28 to 39. It's a kind of a blow-by-blow description of what happens in the south. And it's dizzying, to tell you the truth. Okay. So here we are back to the picture. Makkedah is right in the middle bottom down there. You see it down there? It's kind of small print. So Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Makkedah to Libnah, and the Lord gave it also and its king into the hand of Israel, and he struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, and he left none remaining in it, and he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. And then Joshua and all Israel with him passed from Libnah to Lachish, and laid siege to it, and fought against it, and the Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel, and captured it on the second day, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it as he had done to Libnah. Then Horam, the king of Gezer, came down to Lachish. What? And Joshua struck him and his people until he left none remaining. Oh, okay. Then Joshua and all Israel went with him and passed on from Lachish to Eglon. And they laid siege to it and fought against it, and they captured it on that day and struck it with the edge of the sword, and he devoted every person in it to destruction that day as he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua and all Israel went with him from Eglon to Hebron. And they fought against it and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword, and its king and its towns and every person in it. He left none remaining as he had done to Eglon, and devoted it to destruction and every person in it. Then Joshua and all Israel with him turned back to Debir. We're not sure that's where Debir is, but pretty close. Turned back to Debir, fought against it. He captured it with its king and all its towns, and they struck it with the edge of the sword, devoted destruction every person in it. He left none remaining, just as he had done to Hebron and to Libnah and its king. So he did to Debir and to its king. The southern campaign. And now, finally, God wins. So, in all of that stuff, he gives us finally at the end of the chapter the wrap-up of what happened. He also started us with the wrap-up. And in the middle, he gave us wrap-up. So that's why we have to kind of put these together. So the end wrap-up goes like this. So Joshua struck the whole land, the hill country and the Negev and the lowland and its slopes. Let me show you where those are. The hill country, which is the highest parts in this picture right there. Whoops, don't do that. The highest parts right there. So in the Bible, whenever you talk about the hill country of Judea, well, Judah had this area later on when they occupied, and the hill country is the highest places. The hill country is the top of the mountains at 2,400 feet elevation. So there's the hill country and the Negev, which is a term we use to this very day, the Negev desert. Don't be confused when you see in Hebrew a B or a V. They're almost interchangeable in pronunciation in Hebrew, the B and the V. So the Negev, which is everything to the south. The lowland, which is actually the lowest parts, they're almost all at sea level on the left there. And the slopes, which is the in-between places that go from the lowland up to the hill country, which is in the middle. So he's actually outlined the entire country by how he said this. So Joshua struck the whole land, the hill country, the Negev, the lowland, and the slopes, and all their kings. I mean, really, all their kings. He left none remaining, but he devoted to destruction all that breathed, just as the Lord God of Israel commanded, with the exception of the Hivites in Gibeon. We'll mention more of that later. And then he closes it out and says, Joshua captured all these kings in their land at one time because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all of Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. That was a long campaign. But it basically was his way, like when I went camping, of clearing out the whole perimeter of the place where God was bringing the nation of Israel from these toxic cultures that would influence and bring actually spiritual death to Israel. And that's done. Well, we need to go back and do a little analysis. That was, by the way, that was 9 and 10. That was a lot of chapters right there. Let's go back to this. Let's go back to what I call the Gibeon Gambit. Say that 10 times fast. Gibeon Gambit, Gibeon Gambit, Gibeon. Yeah, it's hard. It's the Gibeon Gambit in Joshua 9. And let's just stop and look at this, because this is very unusual. Later on in Joshua and in other books, when they recount the entire moving into the Promised Land, into the land of the the Canaanites, when they talk about this, they'll say, oh yeah, they took care of everyone except the people in Gibeon. And they'll always say that. This is the one exception, since this is the one exception in the entire book of Joshua. Now, there will be remnants of some of these people that still seem to be kind of interposed in the cultures, and then they are talked about later on. But in terms of actual strongholds and armies and resistance, they're all gone now. They're stragglers. But Gibeon is the only one that's the exception. So we need to take some time on Gibeon, because it's really kind of odd. First off, agreements with any Canaanites were forbidden. Totally forbidden. Totally forbidden. And if you don't believe me, here it is in Deuteronomy 7:2. And when the Lord, your God, gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. Just like I do with rattlesnakes in the campground. Don't make any deals with it. Listen, if you stay over in that part of the campground, I'll feed you little scraps of food in the morning. No, you don't make any deals. So this is clearly against the rules, what happened here. So why did it happen? That's the real question. Why did it happen? If it's totally against the rules, you don't make deals. Well, let's unwind it a little bit. So it sounded as though when they came to Joshua, and the elders of Israel were also listening, and they agreed, it sounded like these folks were professing reverence for God. Maybe sort of like Rahab did at Jericho. I mean, after all, Rahab comes off pretty good in Jericho. So maybe Joshua's thinking, maybe these people are like a group of Rahabs. Could be. God cut some slack for Rahab. By the way, did you know that Rahab is mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus? Did you know, you have to check me on this, I think she's the grandmother of Jesse, who is the father of David. I think. Check me on that. But I mean, it's that close. So here's Rahab. She gets to be in the who's who of Old Testament heroes in a sense. So Joshua's thinking, well, if Rahab, well, then maybe Gibeon. So I wondered about that myself. So I went back and I checked the two claims side by side. The claims made by the Gibeonites and the claims made by Rahab. Okay, let's do that. So here we go. On the right here, this is the claim of the Gibeonites, not Gideonites. I'm sorry, that's a typo. Gibeonites, the Hivites, and they said to him, from a very distant country your servants have come. That's a lie, because of the name of the Lord your God. Well, okay. For we have heard a report of him and all that he did in Egypt. Okay. And all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan. That's everything on the east side of the Jordan. These are the guys, Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. That's about all that they say. So, reverence for God. Let's check Rahab's statement. See if you can spot the differences. Here's Rahab's statement. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea. Okay. Before you, when you came out of Egypt. Okay. And what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and to Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on earth beneath. What's the difference? Acknowledging God in Rahab's statement at the bottom. I mean, she was representing the fear that everybody had before. We heard what happened in Egypt. We heard what happened to Sihon and Og on the eastern side of the Jordan. I mean, we melted, which is kind of a statement for fear. Okay, that's one thing. And they both said that. But then at the end of that, she says, but we know that your God is the real God. That's the difference between these two. And there was no statement like that from the Gibeonites at all. They were just saying, we're toast because we watched God take care of these people. But there was no sense in which they were actually following God or desired to be part of what God was doing in the land, which is not Rahab. Rahab definitely wanted to be. So she switched. By the way, too, another very famous woman in the Old Testament who came from a nasty cultural background but became a mention in the genealogy of Jesus, Ruth. She'll show up on the radar a little bit later in the book of Judges, time frame wise. But she also shows up back there. And Ruth is, I get all choked up when I think about Ruth. So anyway, God includes people who will actually say, your God is my God. Because when you say that, he'll be your God. And you'll be his people. So Joshua's thinking when he makes this contract, okay, check. It doesn't seem like they're Canaanites, so they're not under the devoted to destruction rule. And check. They seem to have a respect for God. But he's wrong. But if you cut him some slack, that's what he's thinking. So if these people are clearly not Canaanites, they are not subject to the devoted to destruction rule. So we'll cut them some slack and not do anything about it. And by the way, they seem to recognize the power of our God. So if I was going to put myself in Joshua's shoes, I probably would have done the same thing. But we know, as people outside the narrative, that he was being fooled. They were fooling him. And they really were Canaanites, and they were just saving their skins. But he was fooled. So I have to say I'd probably have done the same thing. So the men took some of their provisions. They were actually testing how crumbly their bread was. But they did not ask counsel from the Lord. Bingo. That's the verse that jumps out and indicts every single one of us. They did not ask counsel from the Lord. And as a result, Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. The leaders of Israel swore that they wouldn't kill them. Now, why do I say that's the theme of Judges, the next book coming up? If you read Judges, if you just read through Judges, and it reads kind of like a gigantic graphic novel, like a comic book. I mean, Judges is crazy. But what it says throughout the entire thing is Israel is in this bizarre, lawless period where they're not really following God. And the phrase that it uses is, they did what was right in their own eyes. And the result was the craziness of the book of Judges. They did what was right in their own eyes. And what did Joshua do here? He did what was right in his own eyes and didn't bother to ask counsel from the Lord. Now, this is really indicting for us because there's many situations where we assess a situation like Joshua assessed his situation. It says, well, they don't seem to be Canaanites. They don't seem to be like they're going to be a problem. They seem to respect our God. Everything's copacetic. Everything's fine. But the problem is Joshua's being fooled by his senses. And he can't really see what's going on. So the reason that we appeal to God isn't because our logic necessarily is poor. Sometimes it can be, but logic usually isn't it. It's not because of that. It's because your senses are easily fooled. You don't really see the full picture. And God sees the full picture. Now, when I'm dealing with stuff all the time, I'll come to God and I'll say, God, there's just a tough decision I got to make. And there's this and there's that. And, I'm putting this together. They don't seem like they're Canaanites. And they seem like they respect, and I'm making the same kind of thinking in my head that Joshua was doing. But at the end of all that, I come to God and I say, well, this is my take on the matter. But you know what, God, I need to come to you and find out. You see more here than I see. Based on what I see, this is the best I got. And I realize that the best I got is probably going to come up short. My logic might be flawed, and my observational skills and my senses might be flawed. But God, you see to the heart of everything. So God, I come to you. This is a great admonition to us. That even though when things seem like you've got them figured out and put together, you still need to go to God and say, well, God, what do you say? What do you say? And it's not because my logic is flawed. It's because maybe I don't see everything. And by the way, you don't. You really don't. So the whole idea here is you got to ask counsel from the Lord. You really, really do. And the entire book of Judges is dedicated to a bunch of people who never asked counsel from the Lord. Now, I can't say never. There's a couple bright spots in Judges if you read about it. And the bright spots come from a handful of people that are presented to us who happen to actually have the habit of coming to the Lord on issues. One very famous woman who I can't wait to meet is Deborah. When the scene opens in Judges with Deborah, when everyone's just doing what they think is right, there's Deborah presented to us as a woman who sits out under a palm tree waiting for people to come and bring her problems that she can judge. And she's not even officially a judge. They just say, well, we've got this dispute between the two of us. Let's take it to Deborah. And so they'd go out to this palm tree, and Deborah would be sitting out there. And in her wisdom, she'd say, And then the story gets more exciting because then we have armies and fights and chariots and rainstorms. Well, go read it yourself. Judges is a great book. But there are just little twinklings of light where people actually decide to come to the Lord, who have a habit of coming to the Lord, and they demonstrate in the midst of a crazy culture that's doing what they think is right, that the wisdom of God is superior to anything they can drum up. And these are people like Deborah and others. Samson's like that, although he has his good times and his bad times. But that's Judges. Ask counsel from the Lord. That's the big takeaway from this section. But interestingly enough, God honors Joshua's faulty acceptance of the gambit. You notice that? Now see, if I was writing the Bible, wouldn't it go like this? Wouldn't it go where Joshua gets fooled, and then 3 days later, actually it's 3 days later because they come up out of Gilgal and they start walking around and say, hey, you guys look familiar here in Gibeon. Have we seen you before? Oh, wait, we made a treaty with you guys. Hey, wait, Joshua, what's going on? So they figure this out in 3 days' time, right? So there they are, and they understand immediately that Joshua has made a gigantic mistake, along with all the leaders of Israel, make a gigantic mistake. So if I was writing the Bible, God would come down and say, Joshua, that's the end of this. You're being really silly and stupid, and so now we're going to make you lose all your battles today because you just did a bad thing. Or something like that. Or have the people of Gibeon turn around and fight Joshua, even though they made a contract. I don't know. I would do something to clue Joshua and the leaders of Israel in that they did a magnanimously horrible thing in what they did. I'd do something. But instead, God supports the campaign even from here. Now, why would God do that? That's the million-dollar question in this passage. Why does God still, when Joshua comes up to fight against the conglomerated 5 kings and all that, why does God say, take them because I've given them to you? Why does God support that? Because after all, Joshua did an extraordinarily stupid thing. And I can't answer that question. But it gives me great hope when I make extraordinarily bad decisions. Do you chase God away because you've made a bad decision? And God says, that's it, dude, that's it. You're an idiot. I do not support idiots. Quit laughing, Kevin. But it's true, isn't it? I mean, we make so many stupid choices. Many of them, we try to be well-reasoned about them. But, we make some stupid choices. And God doesn't come out of heaven and say, that's it. No more blessings to you. Grace has stopped today. He doesn't do that. In fact, at the beginning of all this story, God says through Moses to Joshua, God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And God's not going to break that promise. And that's exactly what he does here. He doesn't leave him. He doesn't forsake him. But we can still make some goofy decisions that go exactly against what God asked. I think, we don't really know, but I think that Joshua had a soft enough heart that in the middle of all this stuff, when the deception became known, he's probably just beating himself up and wondering, maybe God will now abandon us. And that's why in the middle of that little section, after they discover the deception, God comes to Joshua and says, go up, take these people, because I've finished the battle for you. I'll never leave you or forsake you. And exactly he does that. That's just great. That's just great news for me. And in fact, God so honors Joshua, he honors his request for more sunlight. No, I would not do that if I was God. We need to teach Joshua a lesson. So God, can you give us some more daylight so we can finish off these Amorites? No, Joshua, you made a deal with the Gibeonites and I just can't swallow that. Sorry. Just finish what you're doing today and then come back home. No, we don't do that. But it actually says in the text, there's this sort of amazement in the text. Did you hear it? Like, can you believe it? God did what a man asked. It says that. God did what a man asked. And who did God do this for? Joshua, the Gibeonite lover. Yeah. So God not only does not withhold his grace, but he actually acts in accord with our requests. It's an astonishing thing. If you read through this for the first time, you're waiting for God to drop the other shoe on Joshua. And he never seems to. And I don't think he had to. I think Joshua had a soft enough heart, he understood what he did wrong. Because it never happens again. Ever. It never happens again. Well, it sort of does. It does. But not like Gibeon. Yeah, it's not like Gibeon, yeah. I mean, this is really a bold-faced thing. Yeah, Joshua actually withheld in some cases. We'll see that come up. Yeah. So the 5 kings of the south, they're still vanquished. It's just that they're vanquished in a different place. Instead of having to vanquish them down in their cities in the south, they're vanquished starting from Gibeon all the way down the ascent of Beth Horon and all the way down the coast, down to Azekah and down to Makkedah. I mean, it's like God has taken the 5 kings and their armies, he's concentrated them into one clump and made it so that he could take them out in that clump as it goes down. So it's sort of made it a much more efficient warfare in a sense in doing this. So they're still vanquished, but just in a different place. The irony, and I don't know if you caught this in going, the pagan Gibeonites, they end up serving the worship of Yahweh, of Jehovah in the end. They end up being the woodcutters and the water carriers for what goes on in the tabernacle. And all the way to the end of Joshua, we will revisit them again and see that's exactly what they're doing. So you remember in the tabernacle, there's the burning of sacrifices. Well, who gets the wood? Who cuts the wood and brings it? Well, it was usually the lowest portion of the Levites. You know, the entry-level priests did that kind of, because that was hard work. And there was also water that was used in the big basin right there. And there's not a lot of water in the hill country where they are. Someone's got to haul that water from someplace. So instead of letting the Gibeonites stay what they're doing and doing their pagan worship in that hill in Gibeon, what God does to them is says, you're going to serve the living God right up close to the place where he's worshipped. That's just tremendous irony, tremendous irony. And in fact, it's part of the idea of having your enemies be close rather than far away. Because if your enemies are far away but they're in proximity, you don't know what they're doing. Here, God takes his enemies and he brings them close to the temple and actually allows them to see what goes on in the temple with the nation of Israel as they continue this process. So that's kind of a cool thing. Okay, we need to quit. Next time, we're going to go to the north. And the north, which typically in New Testament terms is called Samaria, this place that's north up to there. And the significant feature up there is going to be the Sea of Galilee. And that's going to help us kind of orient ourselves. But we're going to go almost to the top of this map in terms of doing up there what Joshua just did in the south. And so, you know, northern Canaan is no Cain. No Cain. So you got Southern California, SoCal. Northern Canaan. No Cain? Nah, forget it. Okay. So we're going to go up in this area up here, and it's going to be a little less wild and woolly, but it turns out that we're checking the land for rattlesnakes. And that's what we're going to do up there. Oh, by the way, you got one more piece? Yeah, let me give you one more piece. There's a final thought here. I skipped a verse on purpose. Nobody noticed. Well, I think you might have. Joshua 10:41. This is part of the summary wrap-up. Joshua struck them from Kadesh Barnea as far as Gaza and all the way of Goshen as far as Gibeon. There's another way of him saying how big the area was. Remember, we did that before where he talked about the hill country, then he talked about the lowlands, the transition. So what is this? This is another way of saying the whole place. Well, there's some code language in here. There's a little bit of code language in here. If you're familiar with some of the narratives in the Old Testament, Joshua struck them from Kadesh Barnea. Well, you know where Kadesh Barnea is? It's way down in the desert, way off this picture to the south. I mean, like way down here, way down here. And as we looked at this account in chapter 10, he never did any fighting down there. So as you're reading this, you go, why did he say Kadesh Barnea? That's down in the desert. There's like nobody down there. But if you've been reading the Old Testament, especially the first 5 books of the Bible, Kadesh Barnea comes up in a big light. Bing! And why? Well, hold that thought for a second. So they came up from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza. Kadesh Barnea, middle of the desert to the south. Gaza is where Gaza is today, by the way. Actually, the tip of that arrow points to the city of Gaza right there. So it's where Gaza is today. It's on the coast on that south side. So from deep down in the desert on the south, Kadesh Barnea, up to Gaza, did they do any fighting in Gaza today? No. Another strange thing. Why say Kadesh Barnea to Gaza? Interesting mystery. And then he says from Goshen as far as Gibeon. Well, wait a second. Isn't Goshen in Egypt? Isn't that where the Israelites lived in Egypt? Yeah. So are we talking about from Egypt? Well, not quite. There actually is another Goshen that got named Goshen in Israel. Not well known, but it's the hill country. It's the hill country just to the left of Hebron here, just to the west of Hebron. That hill country that's by Hebron, that's actually called Goshen. So they also went from Goshen up to Gibeon. So what is going on here? Kadesh Barnea, Kadesh Barnea. Remember Kadesh Barnea? Kadesh Barnea. The first time when they left Egypt and they came to the promised land, remember when they bombed out and they didn't go in? And when the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea saying, go up and take possession of the land that I've given you, and then you rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God and didn't believe him or obey his voice. So when they left Egypt and they came up toward the promised land, right? They crossed the Red Sea, they got as far as Kadesh Barnea. And they stopped right there. And God said, send one spy for every tribe, 12 spies, up into the promised land and come back and tell us what's going on. And the 12 spies came back. 10 of them said, oh, there's giants there. And then 2 of them said, yeah, but God's got them. And those 2 guys were Joshua and Caleb. So Kadesh Barnea is a place that Joshua's been before. He didn't go here today, but he's been there before. That's where when he came into the promised land and came back and gave a report of giants, but said, God's got this and God's made a promise, is everything's going to be okay. Kadesh Barnea was how close they got before. So now what Joshua is saying in this book is, now we've completed the trip. God has taken from Kadesh Barnea, which he originally brought us to before, and from Kadesh Barnea all the way up to Gaza, that's God's now. It's a way of figuratively saying that Joshua has finished his route. But also Caleb. Do you remember where Caleb ended up settling? He went to Joshua. This will be at the end of the book. So this is a plot spoiler for you if you haven't read Joshua. At the end of the book, Caleb, who is now 80 years old, after all the fighting's done, and he comes up to Joshua, and they're all talking about where everyone's going to live, and Caleb says, can I live in the place that I originally came to as a spy? And Joshua says, where's that? The hill country to the west of Hebron. Goshen. Oh. So in a sense, Goshen is where Caleb came up, and he sees giants. We'll find out later in the account. He sees giants there. He sees giants there, comes back and says, God's got this. So in a way, we're also figuratively saying everything from where we came to start with and to where Caleb came up to Goshen, that's all taken care of. And then today, what we accomplished was Goshen and Gaza up to Gibeon, and we've completed the trip. That's what he's saying in code language. Isn't that cool? It's really, really cool. So why is that region that's just to the left of Hebron called Goshen? We think that Caleb named it that, but no one really knows for sure. Like he's saying, I came from Goshen and I've come to the new Goshen. We think, but no one's really sure about that. Okay, that was the freebie. But it's just an interesting thing. From that, a Jew would read that and see that as the place that Israel originally failed to enter the promised land, Kadesh Barnea, because they didn't believe God could do it. And so then they spent 40 years in the wilderness, waiting for a generation to die. Okay, I think we're done. Yeah, we're done. I got to be done. We're out of time. We're going to sing one last song, and Caleb, Joshua, yeah. Oh, by the way, I put Joshua's name over there on Gaza, only because there's some speculation that when the 12 spies came in, they went to different places. Caleb went to the hill country next to Hebron, and the speculation because of this phrasing is that maybe where Joshua went was Gaza. Kadesh Barnea to Gaza would have been his route if that's where he went. So anyway, a lot of speculation in that, but basically in Joshua 10:41, he's basically saying we've come full circle now. 40 years from Kadesh Barnea, and now from Kadesh Barnea up to Gibeon, that much of the job is done. That's what he's saying. Okay, we're going to sing the goodness of the Lord, because the intention of the Lord throughout this entire process is to bring the people into a land that is not inhabited with dangers and toxic culture. That's why he's doing what he's doing. That's the goodness of a father involved. But the goodness of a father many times can include harsh justice. And that's what we're seeing. Father in heaven, we thank you for these passages. We thank you for this view into what you did for the nation of Israel. And Lord, we are struck by Joshua's error and our error often about not consulting you in the decisions of life and where we turn left and where we turn right and what it's all about. You entrust to us the job of weighing these things. In the process, you change our hearts and you change our mind. But Lord, many times we choose poorly, and we are thankful that you don't abandon us at that point. And even still, the opportunity, the learning opportunity after we choose poorly, profoundly breaks our heart and changes us in a way that deepens our devotion to you and gives us a more of awareness that maybe we are not on top of things as much as we think we are. We desperately need you in everything like this. We thank you for the promise of new life in a place that you have created for us. We thank you for springing us from the jail of enslavement to sin like they did from Egypt. And we thank you for bringing us to newness of life in a place where you're the center of it, like this place of Canaan is. And we thank you that you have included us in those promises that you first made to Abraham, and now we also participate in, because we, like Abraham, by faith, believe the promise and believe in the God who made it. So thank you for these great stories. In Jesus' name, amen.
Why don't you